Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, a mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in. Welcome into another episode of the podcast, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you again. And if you're watching on the video, you can see that I have changed my audio setup. I have a cool, slick little, it's called a lavalier. It's like a little clippy microphone that clips to my shirt. So I don't have to stand and hold super still over my microphone anymore. And I can kind of just sit and relax and chat with you. And I'm so excited about that because holy cow, I am not a sit stiffly in my chair kind of person. So what I want to talk about this episode is something that I see my clients go through so many times. Like when we start implementing new parenting roles or we start holding boundaries, sort of like the way that unfolds is often jarring to people. Sometimes people call it like a backlash, or like that kid's behavior essentially gets worse before it gets better. We all have this expression in our language anyways, right? Things always get worse before they get better or whatever. There's a reason why that happens, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And so my confession for you, and sorry if you hear beeping in the background, that has nothing to do with my new microphone. It has everything to do with the fact that they are building a house across the street from me right now. So every day is a soundscape that I'm not actually enjoying. Anyway, so my confession for you this week is back many, many moons ago. Let's see, my 18-year-old was probably like 3 or 4 or something like that. And we were trying everything we could to get this kid to stay in his bed. Now, normally I don't care. Like I baby proof a kid's room. And if they sleep in their big boy bed or big kid bed, great. And if they get out and wind up sleeping on the floor, that's great too. I have a hilarious picture in my oldest son's baby book that is like Elijah's first night in a big boy bed, and it looks like an empty bedroom. And if you look really closely, you can just see one of his feet peeking out from underneath his bed. Like there's like a dust ruffle and then like a little cute 2-year-old foot sticking out from underneath there. And that's how, so, sometimes kids get out of their beds and stuff like that. But in this case, our older son and second son were sharing a bedroom. They had bunk beds, and our little 3-year-old kept getting out of his bed every night and climbing up the ladder to the top bunk and like pinching his brother while he was sleeping. And it was bad. He would pull out the dresser drawers in his bedroom and climb them like a ladder, and then stand on his dresser. Like it was about safety that we needed this kid to sleep in his bed. And we tried everything to try to get him to sleep in his bed. And, I already was using Love and Logic at that time, and, and had like really great results with it in all these other ways. But for some reason, like everything, like we would like, you're welcome to sleep with all of your stuffies as long as you stay in your bed. Or we would say stuffies are for kids who stay in their bed. And then he would get out of his bed and we'd take all the stuffies away. Didn't care, And what was happening with this kiddo wasn't just that he wasn't following this rule. It was that his behavior was getting worse and worse. So in the beginning, he would just kind of come out of his bed. Then we put this rule in place where we were going to discipline him around the boundary we had set. We were going to enforce this boundary that we need to stay in our bed when it's nighttime. And the longer we enforced that rule, the worse his behavior got. So first it was just getting out of his bed. Then it was climbing up in his brother's bunk bed. Then it was climbing up onto the dresser. Then it was climbing up onto the dresser and pulling out, all the stuff that were on the shelves above the dresser. Then it was, throwing things around in his room and being disruptive and all of that stuff. And every time he got this consequence, we finally, were able to find a consequence that worked for him and everything.
And during that time, I remember having conversations with my husband where I was just like, this is making, like, what we're doing is making things worse. Like, he's getting worse. He's getting worse. And this is the conversation that I have with my clients all the time when they start to hold boundaries with their kid, if they haven't held boundaries around this thing before. And even more so if they just in general haven't really been great about holding boundaries with their kids. So just 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a client whose kid was, every time they would get in a fight, the kid would be like, "Oh, I guess you hate me." And it was really upsetting to dad. And so um finally dad starts holding boundaries around, like, okay, nice try. I'm not going to take the bait this time, blah blah blah. Well, this kid just starts, instead of just saying, "Oh, I guess you hate me," it's like, "Let me give a whole TED talk about how much you hate me," and all this stuff. And it's breaking dad's heart. And we had this conversation about, like, oh yeah, things are getting worse before they get better. And let's talk about why that happens. And I'm trying to think of like more examples of times when I see this happening. Oh, when we stop feeding into our kids' tantrums, usually the tantrums get longer and more intense for a while before they get shorter and more calm. Because what is happening inside of all of these kids' brains is, okay, this is the skill set that I have, or this is that sort of like my toolkit that I have, and I don't have other tools than this. So this tool has been working for me. My negative self-talk in the case of that one client, or tantrums in the case of a toddler, or getting out of my bed in the case of my kiddo. That's the tool that I've been using, and it's been working for me. It's working to get my parents upset. It's working to get me to delay bedtime. It's working to get my dad to acquiesce on whatever boundary it is that he's trying to set with me, because he's so afraid that I have this negative self-concept. It gets me a candy in the grocery store, my tantrum does, whatever, it works. And so not only is this my one tool, but it has proven to be effective in the past. When parents start changing the way that they're parenting, when we start to hold a boundary and that tool doesn't work anymore for the kids, they don't have another tool yet. And also, this tool has worked for them in the past. So all of a sudden it stops working. It doesn't change overnight. This kiddo doesn't start, thinking, well, what else could I try? Or I guess I better not do that anymore. Or, maybe it'd be better for me to do this thing that my parents are telling me would be better for me. They don't do that right away. What they do is say, oh, well, tantrums, that's my jam. So I guess I just need to do tantrums times two. I need to double down on my tantrum. My tantrums are going to be longer now. My tantrums are going to be more intense, because it's like, this is what has worked for me in the past. Or the same thing with the negative self-talk, or the same thing with climbing out of the bed. Oh, well, climbing out of the bed isn't working my parents up anymore, and it's not getting them upset, and it's not postponing my bedtime. Well, what happens if I climb up into Elijah's bed and I start pinching him? Will that work? Like, let me like up the ante. And so we see this kind of like escalation before a de-escalation. And what I tell my parents, or my parents meaning my clients, what I tell my clients all the time is, human beings double down before we level up. I'm going to say that a second time, because as soon as I say it, you're going to be thinking of like all the examples where this is so true. Human beings double down before we level up. When I have a client who comes to me and is like, things are getting worse, I celebrate, because I know, first of all, different is good. It means that what you're doing is having an impact on your child. But second of all, I know that this means we're in that like messy transition stage to kids learning new skills and leveling up. And if you think about it, you could probably think of examples in your adult life where you double down before you level up. Like, I remember, this is such a simple example, but it's just such a great, I should have used this as my confession, maybe. But maybe like 10 years ago or whatever, actually, let me back up. When I was in college, I had never worked out in my life. I'd never exercised. I was the person who was like, how can I do the least amount of calorie burning in any gym class, like whatever. But when I was a sophomore in college, for some reason, I decided, I'm going to give this exercising thing a try. And so I went from no exercise at all to going to the gym and like just doing 20 minutes of movement on some machine 3 times a week. Well, that was a massive change in my life. And I my health and fitness transformed really, really quickly. But after a while, it was like, okay, this is my new normal. And I wasn't seeing a whole lot of change. And well, I didn't think, oh, well, I'll try tennis now. I just was like, well, I'll do the elliptical for 30 minutes instead of 20 minutes. For a while that like doubling down works until it doesn't anymore. And so, finally after my second kid was born, I had a friend who was like, let's start running. And I had never run in my entire life. And I said yes, because my friend was like, you're doing this race with me. So it's so good when you have a friend like that who's just like, come on, we're doing this. And you're like, okay. So I got really into running. And that was when River was maybe, oh, he was a baby, like a year old or something. And then running was my thing. I never went back to the gym. I just ran all of the time. So fast forward maybe like 10 years later, and I was talking to a friend of mine who is a fitness trainer. And I was like, for the amount of running I do, I should be like a supermodel. I should be like freaking in the Olympics or something. And my friend was like, well, what are you trying? Like, what are you frustrated about? I'm like, well, and this is, I've had now 4 kids. I just don't really feel like I'm, getting back into shape the way I want to be. And I run all the time and I run and I run. And, but look at this and look at that. And I still have this and I still have that. And she just looked at me and she was like, Ann, you're doing the same thing every day. Your fitness has not changed for the last like 10 years. You've just been running, running, running. And if you want something different in your body, you need to do something different. And it had not occurred to me at all that like doubling down on running, like running twice as much, was not going to get me anything different than just more of what I already had. And so I started going to like a lifting class or whatever. And, I'm just, everything changed. Right. But it's like we doubled down before we level up. Oh, I'm not getting the results I want. I'll just run twice as long, or I'll sign up for twice as many races or whatever. And it's like, yeah, no, that wasn't going to work. But I had to do that to prove to myself, like, okay, I have to do something different. And it's a heck of a lot harder to go lift a weight or do a push-up when you've never done any of those things before, which was true for me. That's a heck of a lot harder than just, oh, I'll run for 5 more minutes. I'm doing it already. This is the human brain. Our human tendency is to find the path of least resistance, to do the thing that's going to take the least amount of effort, because we're trying to conserve our energy and all of that stuff. So if tantrums is my jam and then tantrums start to maybe not be working, I'm just going to double down on tantrums for a while. It's not until finally we confront the fact that, okay, I need another tool in my toolkit here, because tantrums, it's not cutting the mustard anymore, that we finally level up. And now remember that when we are parenting our kids, we're not just ignoring their tantrums. We're also talking to them about it once they're calm again, and making suggestions to them about using their words, and modeling for them the way that we handle it when we're upset, which is not to throw a tantrum, ideally. Right. And narrating for them when we see somebody else who's upset and not using a tantrum. So it's not like this child is like inventing using their words out of thin air because tantrums stop working. It's tantrums stopped working. I'm going to keep doing them for a while. I'm going to double down on it for a while. And then I'm going to think, well, maybe I'll try that other thing that my mom told me about. Or I've seen some people use their words when they're upset. Maybe I'll try that. And so, it's not that kids are leveling up out of sheer oblivion. They are leveling up because they're deciding to try a thing that they're already aware exists. Like my friend telling me, Anne, you can't just keep running all of the time. You need to try this other thing. Like, I needed to know that lifting weights existed. I needed a friend to kind of make a suggestion to me about a different way to handle my situation. But did I actually go to the gym the very next day that this person told me that? No, of course not. I just stayed in my rut for a little while longer until finally I was ready to level up. Right. So our kids aren't in a vacuum leveling up. But if you are seeing backlash from your kiddo, if you are trying some of the stuff that you've heard us talk about on the podcast, or if you're a client of mine and you're trying the things that you're learning in your curriculum about setting boundaries and enforcing boundaries, and your kid is, taking it to level 11, celebrate. That is the backlash that precedes the level up. Your child is doubling down before they level up. And if you stay the course, if you continue to hold your boundaries, if you continue to show up with emotional attunement, if you continue to be neutral, your child will level up. They just have to be stuck in their ways for a little while longer. And really, who can blame them? Like, this is how we all are, right? So just acknowledge that we all double down before we level up. Don't give up the fight because it gets harder. And this reminds me of the book, The Alchemist. If any of you have not read it, I highly recommend reading it. It's the book that I gave away as a gift for my retreat a couple years ago. And the book talks about this kind of like testing that the universe gives us when we're on the right track. Like, we might have like initial success, or in the book that he talks about it as like beginner's luck, but at a certain point, like, the going gets hard and we have to keep going, and it's very easy to give up. We talk about this in my coaching work. We talk about the cycle of growth. You've heard me talk about that on the podcast, perhaps in the past. It's that slog that we're in. So when you see your kid double down, just know you're on the right path and you need to keep going and do your work. So instead of changing and pivoting and trying plans B through Z, stick with plan A and do your own homework about what's upsetting to you about this. What do I need to stay committed? What is making me waver? How can I, take care of myself and my emotions and do my leveling up so that I can continue to show up the way that my kid needs me to? And that is the conversation I had with his dad a couple weeks ago, which is, now your kid is saying all of this like TED Talk level stuff about like how you hate him. That's got to be really painful. That's really, really hard. What do you need in order to stay neutral in the face of that? Because it makes perfect sense to feel like you might crack under the onslaught of, sort of emotional torture that your kid is dishing out, where we've all been there before. So I hope that's helpful for you this week. If this stuff is resonating with you and you want to apply it to your own life, if you're feeling really curious about what it's like to work with me, set up a discovery call and we will talk all about what's going on with you, what your goals are, and how to get there. And just know that there are so many ways to work with me. And I'll be talking a little bit more about this in the next podcast, but the big retreat that happens every year in October, enrollment is open for that. My VIPs have already received their invitations, and we have about 6 spots left right now that I am committed to filling. So that is one maybe unique outside of the box way to work with me that you haven't even thought of. But either way, whatever way of working with me is interesting to you, it all starts with us chatting and getting to know each other and seeing if we're a good fit. So set up that discovery call and we'll go from there. The link is in the show notes, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.